Hello, welcome to The Late Show. This is going to be a bit unusual tonight. I'm on my own, but of course I've got some comrades in the control room right now as well, but I also have you at home. I would like to say that if you want to email in, you can do, but I'm not quite sure whether I'll get to all the emails tonight. I really want to share with you some of the things which I've been putting together over the last couple of months. I already did my life stories part 1, which came out a few months ago. And I've been working on part 2, which is dealing with the music, my career as a musician and also as a recording engineer. So I spent probably the best part of my life in the music industry. And I'm going to go through some of these segments, been splitting them up today so that some of them may be a little bit easier for you to follow, and we'll be taking a break in between each segment. So what I want to say is bear with me tonight as I share with you the early days of my music career, and we'll start with the first segment. Welcome to part 2 of the stories of my life. Now this is the period where I share when I was involved in the music industry. Now, just like any other young person, I was very much into music. It was an important part of my life, and it still is. This covers the period when I was involved in the music industry, and I was around 12 years of age when I first started to listen to pop music. And from the money that I earned delivering newspapers door to door, 7 days a week, I had enough money to buy my own records. Records of Buddy Holly.
Peggy Sue, oh how my heart yearns for you, oh Peggy, my Peggy Sue. Oh well I love you, gal, yes I love you, Peggy Sue. Oh well I love you, gal, and I want you, Peggy Sue.
The Everly Brothers.
Here he comes, that Kathy's clown. I've gotta stand tall. You know a man can crawl. Oh, he knows you tell lies and he lives on passing by. He's not on that at all. Here he comes, that's Kathy's clown.
Eddie Cochran, Summertime Blues.
I'm a gonna raise a fuss, I'm a gonna raise a holler about working all summer just to try to earn a dollar. Yeah, every time I call my baby, try to get a date, my boss says,
No diet, son, you gotta work late.
sometimes I wonder what I'm gonna do, but there ain't no cure for the lockdown blues.
I was so influenced by the music that I wanted to learn to play a musical instrument. My mum's sister, my Auntie Pat, was a piano teacher. I asked her to teach me the piano, so I went for my first lesson. And that's when I heard her son, my cousin Maxie, playing the drums. Oh, right there and then, I decided I would prefer to have drum lessons instead of piano lessons, please, Auntie Pat. At that time, Maxie was doing his national service in the army and would only come home when he was on leave from duty. Therefore, having a regular drum lesson from Maxie was just not possible. I couldn't afford a drum kit, so Maxie used to set for me to practice some of the basic drum rudiments, using only a pair of sticks and a cushion. Yeah, a cushion. How could that help? Well, this was hard going. You don't get any bounce from a cushion, whereas with a real drum, you have the skin on the drum, and from hitting the drum, you get a much better bounce. I used to practice for hours and hours on my own, as I didn't have that weekly lesson from Maxie, my cousin, because he was doing his 18-month compulsory national service. However, by the time I left school at the age of 15, I was already playing semi-pro gigs with local bands in the Darlington, County Durham area. I also used to work in the working men's clubs. Now, I was underage for being in one of those working men's clubs because it was made for working men, and I was still like a 14, 15-year-old. And my cousin Maxie also used to take me to the jazz clubs. I loved that. I was only around about the age of 14 at that time, as you can see from the photo, but don't tell anybody, okay? I began to enjoy jazz, and I was listening to musicians such as Joe Morello, who was an American jazz drummer, best known for being the drummer of Dave Brubeck, and the piano guy, you remember? Take 5, the hit record? Yeah. It's really great to have such influential musicians such as Buddy Rich as well, which we're going to be looking at next, and also some of the other influences that got me when I was a young person, wanting to learn how to play an instrument, and the drums was my instrument. Another great example for me was Buddy Rich. Oh, you check out that YouTube, if it's possible to get the Impossible Drum Solo, as it's called. And I use one of his licks even to this day. And then there's another great drummer, Gene Krupa. And he did Big Noise from Winnetka. I too made a record of Big Noise from Winnetka. I'll tell you what it was. We'd just been doing a session, demo session with somebody in Regent Sound, and it was at the end of the session. We had about 10 minutes left of recording time. So I said to the guys, including Mitch Mitchell was one of the guys, who was with Riot Squad in those days, and he became the drummer with Jimi Hendrix. He was there and he played tambourine for me, and I played the drums. Amazing. Okay, and anyway, we laid down this track, Big Noise from Winnetka, and literally one take, and that was it. And I took it to a record company. They released it. Didn't go very far, but yeah, at least we did it. But being a typical 15-year-old growing up in Darlington around 1961, I was more influenced by pop music than jazz. And being part of the local pop scene, I recall playing the drums with a band at a place called Witham Hall in Barnard Castle.
Well, hello, Howard. This is where it all started, with you meeting up with the Barron Knights. I had a job with a band playing somewhere else, and I gave you the job to play with the outfit here, supporting the Barron Knights. And they must have been very impressed with what you did, because you joined them almost immediately. Full-time band, proper wage, and you did a good job. We were all very proud of you. Me in particular, I taught you. But this is the place. Witham Hall, Barnard Castle, 1962. A date that will certainly go down in your history.
That was in the early months of 1962. We were the supporting band for the main attraction, and that was the Barron Knights. They were the main attraction. And when we finished playing that night, the Barron Knights asked me if I would like to join them full-time as their drummer. Wow. The reason was that the drummer Dave Morrow was soon to leave the band, so they were looking for a replacement. It was only a matter of weeks before I set off on my journey from the north of England And it was my first time of leaving home. Remember, I'm only 16, just 16. Never been kissed. I'm only joking. I left all my family and all my friends behind, and oh dear. However, at that time, I was not daunted by what I was leaving behind, and I was so excited to be able to go and join the Baronites. I was contracted as a professional musician to the Baronites for 5 years, and I was on £10 a week. That was not a big deal in those days, but it was better than I would have got if I would just get a job locally.
Hi, Howard. You may not remember this building behind me, but if we put, say, a wimpy bar, that'll definitely strike a chord. Your first attempt at making a living after leaving school as a burger bar chef. But as destiny would have it, and your talent as an amazing drummer took you way on to fame and fortune. It's just as well. As a burger bar chef, oy vey, what can I say? Like, if you're hungry enough, you'll eat anything.
I just celebrated my 16th birthday, and I don't know where I got to be so brave to go on my own on many train journeys to get from the north of England and to get down to Bedfordshire. And I was dragging my drum kit around, yeah, all the way on and off trains. I mean, it'd be better if I was a flute player or a guitar player, but all the drum kit had several pieces to it, and I was doing this all on my own. But eventually, I reached Leighton Buzzard in Bedfordshire. I stayed for the first few weeks with the parents of Anthony Osmond. Anthony was we used to call him Tony, of course, was the leader of the Baronites, and this gave me time to look for a more permanent place to live. Well, my mother was very good to me, bless her. She bought me a cheap old caravan. It was only, I think it cost like 60 quid in those days. It was falling apart a bit, but anyway, it was enough for me. When we placed the caravan in the backyard of the pub called the Lamb in Leighton Buzzard. And of course, this is the area where the Baronites also rehearsed. And they did this in the outhouses, as you'll see from the photos. So this was at the rear of the pub called the Lamb. It was so cold in the winter of 1962-63 that my hot water bottle froze whilst I was sleeping, and the snowdrift against the caravan door was so high I could hardly get out of the caravan. It was one of the coldest winters on record in the UK. Temperatures plummeted and the lakes and the rivers froze over in that particular winter. Those who knew me, though, know I just can't stand the cold. And after about 9 months with the Baronites, I began to struggle. Yeah, I was struggling. They weren't the friendliest set of people, I have to say. I was only 16 and they were 4 or 5 years older than me, and that age difference is quite big at that age. And Tony Avern, who's the Baronites manager, he said to me, the moment that I arrived in Leighton Buzzard was rather strange for me. He said, "We keep ourselves to ourselves, so you keep yourself to yourself." This was the total opposite of what I was used to, and I was accustomed to friendly folk in the north of England. But now, having been told categorically, keep yourself to yourself, was just so alien to me. I was so lonely, especially when we were not travelling to a gig or we were on the coach or we were performing on stage. That was all fine, but when I was so-called back home in my caravan and not being able to meet with the Baronites band or anything, you remember they had their family and friends, and that was where they were brought up. So I couldn't socialise with anybody because I didn't know anybody in that whole area of Bedfordshire. And mine was 215 miles further north, so I could hardly go home for dinner or Sunday lunch even. My family time was non-existent, and over the months that I was with the Baronites, we were becoming more and more popular. We were playing nearly every day and on rehearsing, of course, and sometimes 7 days a week. And after about 9 months of full-on work, and travelling all around the country, I became very weary, both physically and mentally. Especially when the manager told me that my then girlfriend, Liz, God bless her, was seeing someone else. And that happened when I was away on tour, you know, so I was homesick and missed my mum, my family and my friends back home in Darlington, and then came the day it all was too much and it all went wrong. It was a day we were playing a local gig at the California Ballroom in Dunstable, and I collapsed with exhaustion. I was taken to hospital, and the next day, Tony Avern, the manager of the Baronites, he came to visit me. I said to Tony that I wanted to get out of hospital, and because we had gigs, we had to perform, and I was okay, just I'll come out, I'll let myself out. Tony said, "Don't worry, Howard. You must stay in hospital until you're well." Okay? I said, "What about my job?" He said, "Don't worry about it. It is secure." And I wasn't to worry. Stay in hospital until you get well. Well, that put my mind at rest. And so I stayed in the hospital. I think it was only for a few more days. The doctors had observed that I was not only physically exhausted, but also very depressed. My mental state was not good, and I was mainly being treated for that aspect rather than anything else physical. And I was following that up, you know, post being actually released from hospital. So I was being treated for, you know, depression, basically. Anyway, the Baronites manager, Tony Avern, you know, all of a sudden told me, "We've replaced you by another drummer," and that I'd lost my job. He sacked me right there and then. I was isolated from my friends up north, and I became even more depressed having been sacked as well. And I had suicidal thoughts at that stage. I so wanted to talk to my dad, but my dad had sadly passed away a few years earlier. Fortunately, my dear mum came down from Darlington to be with me, and we both went to London, where we had new opportunities for me to continue my career as a professional drummer. That's thanks to my mum, bless her heart. We first lived in a rental apartment in Ridge Road in Hornsey, North London. And during this time in London, I was trying to get my drum kit back from the Baronites. However, it soon became clear that my drum kit was not or ever coming back to me. The Baronites were being plain unhelpful, to put it mildly. I was beginning to be offered work with a local band in North London and was starting to work as a session drummer for Joe Meek. Joe Meek was one of the best recording engineers and producers of that particular era, and he was keen on giving me more session work, but being bereft of my drum kit, I needed somehow to get another set of drums, and I certainly didn't have any money to buy another set because they were very expensive. My dear mum said she would buy me a new drum kit. Bless her cotton socks. Wow. You know, it brings back a lot of memories to me, and of course it doesn't mean a lot to you guys out there, but, you know, it's been quite cathartic for me to do these Life Story series. Got a long way to go yet, but let me just say thank you for staying with me. And Jen's just written in. She says, "Howard, absolutely loving your life story. Would be great if we could buy it on DVD. Do you think there's a possibility of this to happen? God bless you." Jen? Yeah, I haven't thought about it yet, but yeah, let's see what we can do, Jen. There's all sorts of things like copyright stuff and things like that, but we can certainly look at it because it is coming out quite well. As I've been working hard on it. Now I'm going to go. The next section is about the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of my experiences as they continue with the Barron Nights. And remember, I was only 16 years of age, and which was very young, and they were a lot older than me, and it was pretty hard. Have a look at this. Anyway, I went looking for a new drum kit, and I went into this music shop that sold drum kits. It was in Shaftesbury Avenue in London. And as I walked into the shop, to my amazement, it's my drum kit up for sale in this music shop. Even had my name, Howie, on the drum skin of the bass drum. What? I could see that the guy who was behind the counter was very interested in seeing me there and noticing that my drum kit was there. He looked really suspicious. So what did I do? I actually went to look for a policeman, okay? By the time I got back and I returned to the music shop and complete with the policeman, guess what? My drum kit had gone. And so I asked the guy in the music shop, I said, so where was the drum kit that was here about 10 minutes ago? What drum kit? Totally denied it ever being there. I tell you what, you just couldn't make it up, could you? Eventually we bought another drum kit. It was a Ludwig Classic. Oh, amazing sound. I think the cost then was about £750. I tell you what, my mum did an amazing job because she paid for the apartment we were renting. She paid for all the upkeep and looking after me. I didn't know. I had no idea as a 16-year-old that my mum, as a widow, was on a tight budget. I had no idea. So I realized that I needed to start making some money and, you know, so I could contribute to the living expenses. So I did some adverts for the Milk Marketing Board, and I remember working through an agency doing house cleaning. Can you imagine me house cleaning? I know my wife can't. So I wasn't doing that for very long because I wasn't very good at it. Anyway, my Auntie Pat, my mum's sister, she was quite wealthy. So I wrote to her and I wanted to borrow some money from her so I could start a business in Holloway Road, and because there was a shop up for rent almost next to Joe Meek's studio, if you know where that is, in Holloway Road. Here I am, 16 years of age. I want to start a business. You know what I was going to do? I was going to do a real estate agency and an employment agency in case one needed the help with the other if one was quiet. I had all this worked out in my mind. And so I asked my Auntie Pat, could you lend me, I think it was, I was only asking for 40 quid. She turned me down. I'm laughing at myself here, by the way. If you want to email me, please do, live@revelationtv.com. If I get a chance at the end, when I've got more time, I will read them out. But anything that comes up, which is short and snappy, to the point, I'll read it out in between the segments. Now, the next segment, it is all about really the court case, the Barron Nights. My mother took them to court on my behalf because I was a minor. And so the case set a precedent, and it was Conda v. Barron Nights. Have a look at this. Back to the early days of living in Hornsey, Crouch End area, north of London, I was still looking for work as a professional musician. And by now, I was regularly going down to Denmark Street, where a lot of the musicians that is, gathered together trying to suss out what was going on that particular day. And was there any work? Was there any session work? Is there a band that needs a musician? And you were just looking for work. And we used to meet at that time, Gioconda. But I'll come back to that a bit later. At this time, my mother had already begun legal proceedings against the Barron Nights for unlawful dismissal and for not returning my drum kit. I was a minor, being 16 years of age at that time, therefore my mother had to instigate the court proceedings on my behalf as she was my legal guardian. As you can see there from the headline, Barron Knights, 1966, and it's Conda v. Barron Knights, okay? They misspelt my name, they also misspelt Barron Knights as well. But anyway, this is what they described in the case. A 16-year-old agreed by contract to play the drums for the defendant's band 7 nights per week for 5 years. The claimant suffered a mental breakdown and was told by his doctor that he should not perform more than 4 nights per week. The band dismissed him. He brought a claim for wrongful dismissal. The claimant's action was unsuccessful as his medical condition made it impossible for him to perform his contractual obligations, and the contract was thus frustrated. In my opinion, working 7 days and nights a week, anybody would soon get very tired, especially a 16-year-old, okay? And I think and I believe that this case, as it did set a precedent, was a precedent for far too many years, where many other young persons like myself could have also fallen foul under the precedent that my case set. What this did for me, though, was it made me more determined to work 7 days a week, mainly for psychological reasons. I was trying to prove that the judge, you know, when I meet him one day in the resurrection, hopefully, we'll actually be able to have a chat and say, do you know what? I think you were a little bit unfair making a minor, a young person, do 7 days a week. You know, I wasn't strong enough in body and soul and spirit to work 7 days a week as the judge ruled, but what it made me do is I've ever since worked 7 days a week and more than 8 hours a day. Usually my day is between 10 and 12 hours a day. And I'm sure the judge would be very proud of me, yeah? This case took almost 3 years to eventually be heard at Bedford County Court in 1966. Remember, I was 1963 when I was fired, and it was 1966 when it went to court. My mother was a widow on low income and could not afford the fees of an experienced barrister. Therefore, she qualified what we call legal aid. And not being able to afford independent legal representation of a higher caliber was to prove a big mistake, as you'll realize as the story unfolds. Even though it took nearly 3 years to go to court, it would make sense to mention the case at this moment in time, because here's what transpired at court. I can remember that the barrister who was acting on our behalf was really a rookie. He was told off many times by the judge for not being able to follow the right procedures. And, you know, I was also told when I said, oh, you know, okay, what about my drum kit? The Barron Knights took my drum kit, didn't return it to me. What about the drum kit? Oh, you can't mention the drum kit. I said, what? No, you can't mention it because the Barron Knights paid for the drum kit the day before we went to court. And that's a very clever trick that people play on you. If you pay what the other person is been moaning about, then they can't bring it up during the court case. Well, that was my drum kit, which cost me a lot of money, is just gone. So our barrister, being wet around the ears, did little to inspire our legal representation in the court. This was our very first time we'd ever been to court, and the experience, I could see this was disgusting. But I did say, you know, the Barron Knights have kept my kit, and now I'm without a kit. I can't carry on with my career. I was totally messed up. And of course, in my mind, as you know, by that time I was 19 years of age, I'm thinking, how can this be right? This is my first experience in a court of law, and all these people wearing wigs and things like that, you know, and speaking posh, and oh dear me, what a thing. And then you don't get justice, you know. I could have been doing work up a chimney 7 days a week, and a little bit Dickensian, I think. Anyway, my appeals to the judge fell on deaf ears. As I say, it reminds me of the days of Charles Dickens, who wrote about the child slavery, and surely this sort of employment I had with the Barron Knights contracted as I was, amounted to child slavery in the 20th century as well. The only people in the court that had any sympathy for us was the, believe it or not, the press. Well, one of them turned to me and said, "You know what, son? You know what they say about the law? It's an ass." You can read the newspaper here for yourself. The fall of the £10 a week pop idol. This is the newspaper clip. Unbeknown to me at that time, my mum and I, we went to live in London, and I was not aware of my mother's financial situation. Remember, she'd also paid for my drum kit to be renewed, replaced, and also she was paying for all the overheads in a rental apartment in London. It wasn't cheap in those days. We'd all come from the north of England where everything was a lot cheaper. But my mum, she'd sold her home in order to fund all of these additional costs, which could have been avoided if we'd won the case against the Baronites. But however, I made sure that we would never again use legal aid barristers, and if the need arose in the future that we'd have to be in court, we would engage a seasoned barrister who was more experienced and knew how to properly represent their clients, as indeed what the Baronites had. Very smart guy. But he has to, no, I won't say anything about what he has to do in the future.
I think this would be the house that my Auntie Lily lost, you know, with that case.
I needed to connect with the music. Okay, we're having a few technical problems. Let me read some texts and emails that are coming in. One here, which obviously somebody really upset with me. Nothing new, by the way. Howard, why should we fund a channel that is all about you and not about Jesus? I can't believe what I'm viewing tonight. Go and get some therapy, but don't work it out live and claim to be promoting the gospel. How is all of this about you, self-indulgence, rather than promoting the gospel? No name, of course, but quite interesting. I mean, yes, you might have a good point here, but obviously you don't know me because I've spent the last 30 years preaching the gospel. I've been to different parts of the world. I'm not going to try and justify myself, but thank you for writing in anyway. Oh, by the way, whoever it is that wrote this, why should we fund a channel like this? Let me know how much you paid in, and I'll pay you every penny back personally. How about that? Is that a good deal? Okay, good. All right. Cynthia writes in, Howard. Oh, it's quite the opposite. I'm going to say, you are so humble. I just really feel for you, but thank God you had a loving mum. Amen. And how the Baronites treated you was disgusting. I've always looked out for my sons as well, even though I'm a widow at age 82. Bless you, Cynthia. And Laura writes in, what a fascinating life you've had, Howard. Really enjoying tonight's show. Everything you've been through seems to have been useful for you to work for the Lord. Thank you, Laura. I'm glad it's good. By the way, with technical problems are over. Sorry for the viewer that has to, you may as well switch off now. I'm going to the next clip, which is more self-indulgence. And I think it's connecting with musicians when I first came to London. Have a look at this. I needed to connect with the musos. And where were the musos meeting? In central London, in a little cafe called the Gioconda, which was in Denmark Street, affectionately known as Tin Pan Alley. It was at the Gioconda that I first met with David Bowie, who were legends who were also looking to either a publishing contract or a record deal. There were many record and publishing companies in the famous West End of London, as well as recording studios such as Regent Sound. And Bill Farley, who was an excellent sound engineer, and he would make your demo sound absolutely fantastic, really, really good. What is a demo? A demo is a recording about how you want to present your music ideas or your song to a publishing company or to a record company and try to get a deal with them. Also, if you needed to buy a musical instrument, this was the area in London where you could get your guitars, drums. Rose Morris, for example, had a wide range of instruments, and you had Orange and Jim Marshall, who made these amazing amps. However, the Gioconda was the place to meet, and I was there quite recently and met the present owner, who very kindly let us in to film inside this iconic cafe. Back in the days when I first moved down to London, having just finished playing drums for the Baronites, I began looking for professional work as a musician. I soon discovered the place where all the musos would meet, and that is Denmark Street. If you needed to buy a musical instrument, or you were looking for a music, publishing or record deal, or looking to join a band, then you would come here to Denmark Street, affectionately known as Tin Pan Alley. Here was where the cafe would be, and it was in the day called Gioconda. Well, it's still here, and it's under the same name, except it has the flat iron above it. I met with the present owner and to ask him if we could come in and do some filming in the cafe. He very kindly lets us in. I can't believe it, but we're here in the Gioconda, or what was the Gioconda, which is a cafe in Denmark Street, or known as Tin Pan Alley. We used to meet here with David Bowie. We'd have a cup of tea, because we were all looking for work in the early days. Mitch Mitchell, the drummer with Jimi Hendrix, he and I were always looking for work. We're a little bit of competition, really. Of course, just a few yards along from here is Regent Sound, or was Regent Sound, where the Cream, Eric Clapton, Ginger Baker, Bruce, whatever his name is, can't remember now, getting old, you know. We all used to go in there to record our demos. Having been in the music industry since I was the age of 16, many, many years ago, so this place is so dear to me to be able to find this today. But I worked for a while with the NEMS Enterprises, the Beatles management company, as a record producer. I remember when Robert Stigwood asked me one day to come to an audition for a band that he was looking to sign. They'd come all the way from Australia, and their name was the Bee Gees. I mean, how you just can't make it up, can you? And so we went to see them and audition them, and I remember that day. It was quite a privilege, because within weeks Robert Stigwood had signed up the band, and they were already hitting the charts in America. And it's just an amazing place, you know. Now a restaurant, but it's still got a name, Gioconda, underneath its new name. This is an amazing experience for me to come into this restaurant and have fun. A big thank you to the owner of the Gioconda. Thank you, sir. It's rather ironic that as I am completing this video, and I've just received this card from a dear viewer, which reads, "Dear Howard, God bless you. I saw this card and I hope it will bring back happy memories of having a cup of tea with David Bowie. I hope your health is improving, and I look forward to seeing you on our TV programs. Praise our Lord all the time. Thank you, Jesus, for all things. With my love, Joan." Thank you, Joan, and God bless you for your very kind words, and very timely too. I am indeed privileged and blessed to have such a great set of memories, especially of my early days in the music industry and meeting David Bowie. Bear with me, we're going to get through these. We have to move quickly. So I'm going to go to the next section, really, which is self-explanatory, really, but it is quite sensitive, so I hope you don't get the wrong end of the stick. I really should share with you about the very first time that I met Joe Meek. It's very sensitive. I don't want to be misunderstood, because I know how quickly people can be offended with perhaps some of the things I'm going to share. But I want it to come across as not a hate thing, okay, when I explain it, because this is what happened, okay? I went into the office where Joe Meek has his studio premises. It was in Holloway Road, North London, and I'd been introduced to him by Gary. And I went along for an audition to see if I was good enough drummer to be on some of his recordings. And I was standing there in the office, and Joe came up and stood in front of me, and we're talking, and all of a sudden he put his hands down into my trousers, and I was shocked because I've never experienced anything like that before. And so I'm standing there thinking, what on earth's happening? And he's fiddling with my you-know-what. I never, as I say, had any experience of this before. I'm 16 and a half, not quite 17 years of age. Never had anything happen to me at school or anything by someone of the same sex trying to play with my sexual parts. Anyway, so I sort of was a bit frozen, and fortunately Joe got the message that I wasn't interested and took his hands out of my trousers, and we carried on the conversation. It must have looked really weird if you were filming it. Anyway, so I did an audition for him playing drums, the drum kit upstairs in the studio, and I said, right, well, goodbye, and thank you very much. He said he'd get in touch with me, and so I went home, spoke to my mum, and I tell you, I said to my mum, I told her what happened. You know, I'm not that innocent, but I'm not experienced in this same-sex stuff. Okay, so I said, Mum, this is what he did. And I've got to go back next week. And so I get the results of whatever it is that, you know, do I get the job or whatever? And I don't know what to say if he does that again. And my mum, bless her heart, she said, well, you tell him you're strictly for the girls. Oh, okay, Mum, thank you very much. You know, and quite innocently, that's exactly what happened. I went back the following week and standing in the office again. Joe tries it one more time with me, puts his hands down my trousers, and I said, don't laugh, Howard. My mum's words came back to mind, and I just said, my mum says I'm strictly for the girls. His hands came quickly out of my trousers, and he said, I like you like that. And of course, when I think back on it, you know, I just remember that, you know, that was something which he probably would have got into trouble with, because I think I was underage. But nevertheless, I've got to say this. Joe was the nicest guy. He was so helpful to me. I worked and did many sessions with him, and I've just got to say that I was really, really upset when he committed suicide, you know, some months later, and because he was such a talented person, and so much he inspired me, both in the studio as a musician and the sounds he used to get, but he inspired me to the point where later in my life I wanted to do what he did, and you know, have all the different bits of equipment and make a good sound out of something that ordinary people wouldn't necessarily, or some engineers, sound engineers, wouldn't be able to do. So yeah, he was something else. But you know what? I was doing a session one day with Joe, and he said, right, get yourself off. Joe Brown, two of his brothers have just walked out on Joe. And so you've got to get yourself over to the theatre. It was somewhere who was doing the pantomime Aladdin, I think it was. So this would have been around about 1964. And he said, get yourself over there and do an audition. I want you to get the job. So Joe Meek was really, really keen on me, you know, sort of doing well in the music industry. And I'll never forget that. It was a real blessing to me. And that's what happened, you know. It led to me getting the job. And my bass player, who was in my band at the time, Mike Davis, we were contracted and hired by Joe Brown after we did an audition. And in fact, actually, he said to me, Joe Brown said, the bass player's not so good, but as he's with you, we'll take you both on. And that was it. And so there we were. And it was amazing. But as I say, going back to Joe Meek, he's such a neat guy, such a clever creative engineer, and it was just so sad when I found out that he shot himself. I don't need to go into the details because they're all quite out there in social media, and even a film has been made about it. So there you go. Going back to the times when I was doing session work as a drummer for Joe Meek, I'd be paid a session rate or a fee for doing that. And I was recording at Joe Meek Studios, where the now legendary guitarist Ritchie Blackmore of Deep Purple, he was also recording his music there as well. And I was playing drums, and Ritchie was doing a track. I would just like to add, you know, just with that experience I had with Joe Meek, you know, trying to touch my sexual parts and everything, you know, I'm not homophobic. If somebody wants to live a lifestyle like that, you know, that's up to them. I know I have a Christian or biblical view on that, which is different to most people, but it doesn't mean to say I hate homosexuals. I don't. I know there are some out there that think I do, so I just want to make it clear that I am deeply saddened by what happened to Joe Meek, and there are other people as well that tried to have sex with me, if you want to call it that, as males, and I didn't. It's just not me, okay? But I recognise that's up to them what they do, but it's up to me what I do. But it seems this day and age that you have to conform to the wokeness of the LGBT movement. And, you know, I've just got to say, I follow my biblical views and stay by that. And I'm really quite relieved that when I did find out, anyway, we'll get into that a bit later, but I did find out that, you know, having the views I had, it was upheld by biblical views as well. So anyway. Oh, and one other little thing, you know, Joe Meek, he was a little bit hot-headed at times, and you'd be sitting there doing a session, you know, whether it was with Ritchie Blackmore or some other guitarist and bass player, and I was on drums. You know, if Joe tried to get you to actually perform in a certain way, musically or whatever, and that he would actually say, this is what you want to do, and some people weren't willing to do it. And I tell you what, Joe would get so cross with you and he'd throw you down the stairs. And fortunately, that never happened to me. Joe was always very kind to me. A little bit of a teaser because we've got to go straight into it. What does Roy Orbison have to do with this next clip? Have a look and find out. So with Joe Brown, I played with Joe Brown as one of the brothers for around the next 18 months, right up until Joe decided to stop gigging because he wanted to just focus on theatre productions. And he was in something that was called Charlie Girl, that was it. And he was appearing with Anna Neagle in Charlie Girl. I think it was at the Adelphi Theatre in the West End of London. And during the time I was with Joe Brown, I was privileged to play at the Royal Albert Hall. I think the top of the bill was the Rolling Stones, and we were just one of the supporting acts in that sense. So that's the equivalent to Carnegie Hall, I think, in America. And also another great highlight that I had playing drums was at the 1964 NME Poll Winners concert at Wembley, where the world-famous singer Roy Orbison handed us the award for the top personality of the year. When you think that there are so many top 10 world-famous acts to choose from that year, and they were all on the bill on that particular day, take that as a great and significant achievement for such a young lad as I was. I think I was, by that time, 17 years of age. But Joe Brown's ward was truly a day to remember. Amongst the others that were playing that time at the Paul Winner's concert were the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Hollies, Manfred Mann, Cliff Richards, Dusty Springfield, the Animals, Billy J. Kramer, the Searchers, Jerry and the Pacemakers, Freddie and the Dreamers, the Swinging Blue Jeans, Kathy Kirby, and special message from Elvis Presley at the end. It was an all-day event. It was amazing. But we were amongst some of the greatest performers in the whole of the music business ever, I would say. And we play some of that video from the NME concert to watch just this short excerpt from Joe Brown and the Brothers performing.
Mother says I look a yob, me trousers are too tight. She says I ought to get a job and not stay out all night. She doesn't like my haircut. She says me friends are lousy. And then she said it's getting late. On miss me, azzy, oh, Dad's gone down the doctorate. Mother's playing bingo. Sister smooching on the sofa. You should hear the spring go. No one seems to notice me. Is any nursing? What a crazy world we're living in. Now the law pulled me out thieving. Took me down the neck. Sergeant made out his report and he laid it on real thick. He said, I'll fetch your parents. I answered with a grin. Save yourself the trouble, mate, you'll never find them in. Dad's gone down the doctorate. Mama's playing bingo. Me brothers are all layabout, so what a life by jingo. No one seems to notice me. It's earning a sin. What a crazy world we're living in. What a crazy world we're living in. What a crazy world we're living in. 3, 4, knock on the door. Crazy world we're living in.
And to make the presentation at this point, we welcome one of America's favorite singing stars, who is one of our most popular American visitors of the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Roy Orbison.
It gives me great pleasure to present Joe Brown with this award for the top British vocal personality of the year. Thank you very much. Thank you.
There I was, 17 years of age, on the stage with Joe Brown, being handed the award by Roy Orbison. There was lots of television shows that we appeared on with Joe Brown as well, like The Morecambe and Wise Show, Frankie Howard, Tommy Cooper, he was a laugh, wasn't he? Arthur Haynes, and not to forget music shows like Top of the Pops and Ready, Steady, Go. We also toured with other well-known musicians such as Manfred Mann, and Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, of course, and several American artists like the Crystals, the Do-Ron-Ron. Do you remember that? And I'm sure it was this band that asked me to go to America to be their drummer. I was only a young lad, but probably just as well I didn't go. Let's play a little of the track, the Do-Ron-Ron. Anyway, I have to say that Joe Brown, compared to the horrible experience I had with the Baronites, Joe was an amazing, the best person I've ever worked with. He was a hard taskmaster, but I needed it because I needed that discipline, but he was always kind and treated everyone in the band with the utmost respect and was a true professional and still is a true professional in every way. He always paid us our wages on time, you know, which is not the usual thing in the music business. And Joe had integrity, and well, he has integrity, let me put it.